Looks like we're back for the last session of our summer night series. Daryl Roberts, co-founder of Roberts Family Development Center, along with the lovely Tina Roberts.
Good evening.
Looks like Mr. Marcus Shelby is available with us today, and Mr. Harley White. So thank you guys for joining us all summer long. And Harley, we appreciate you.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you.
Cool. So, what you chewing?
Harley, you just eating your dinner?
Let's see. Our panel will join us a little bit later, but for now, tonight's theme is freedom and activism, and we have an exceptional panel to have a deep discussion, a deep dive into that topic. But before that, we've been going to take a couple minutes. Harley, Marcus, myself, and Tina, freedom and activism. Marcus, you want to talk a little bit about how busy we've been the last few months, and what has that meant to you, Harley, me?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I think we've seen in the last 4 months is just sort of something that has come to a point in time. It's been brewing for the last several years. If we look at this era, it reminds me of the civil rights movement in the 60s, 50s, where you would have different cities would have certain sort of action against the injustices. When we've seen it here in St. Louis, we've seen it in Minnesota, we've seen it in Portland, we've seen it in Kentucky, Louisville, and the bigger cities. Just like we did in the 50s and the 60s, where we had a movement in Birmingham and Montgomery, one that went to Selma, Alabama, and Chicago and other places. And some were victories, some were losses, but in each case, yeah. I think we as a collective learned lessons and stayed committed. And so I think that's the key, is that that this movement stays committed, and that it has a multi-faceted approach to dealing with police brutality, racism, right, white supremacy, and all these different things that we're battling.
So I like to call it from protest to policy, because we have to make sure that we have an impact on policies and to change them so that our protests are not in vain, and that it's just not a moment, but truly a movement.
I think the historical perspective that you brought up, that we've been here before. We've been here before in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. We're here today looking at the possibility of policy change to election, but really systemic change, yes, to conversations, yes, that's happening nationally. And some places you're finding that there is a willingness to make those systemic changes now. There'll be changes that will occur in November as a result of others being elected, both locally in various cities, but nationally, if that tide continues. We saw I'm looking behind you and see George Floyd's picture over your left shoulder, Marcus, and I realized that although we talk about George Floyd being the flashing point or the spark that lit everything up, it's been a simmer for a while.
Yes.
The whole conversation around police reform has been upon us for years now. It's just that and somebody was saying to me, I think I heard my little brother say this. I happened to be in New Orleans for a few days recently, and he was saying, you know what it was? He said it was that when George Floyd was killed, there was no question how it was done, and it wasn't just those who typically are involved with a movement or involved in activism that saw it and responded to it, but instead it was young people, and that nobody can really hide the fact that this is what's happening in our country. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't hide that, and no matter how it was talked about, it was nothing more that could be said. And one of the things that hasn't been anybody tried to do is tear up his reputation, although it started for a minute, that ended very quickly when the issue became, what did the officers do for 8 minutes and 20 something seconds, you know, and their actions during that time really is what people focused on and said, this is not acceptable. That being the part that then gave others the privilege and opportunity to talk about other changes that needed to occur, you know.
Well, you know, a lot of it, it's the George Floyd moment was like the Emmett Till moment when the open casket, when people finally kind of witnessed the evil and the destruction of racism to young Emmett Till in 1954 with his mom demanding an open casket. And you had this sort of national outcry, South, where he was visiting his relatives, the Midwest, where he was from, Chicago, and so you kind of saw that happen across the nation and in areas and institutions that were afraid to declare Black Lives Matter. So that moment happened. The Emmett Till moment was probably the moment that the civil rights movement took off in earnest, because 4 months later was Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King, and so on. So we'll see. We're in the middle of this moment. The only thing I'd like to finally say is that music has a purpose, like it did back then. It has a purpose of messaging. It has a purpose of organizing and empathizing. And so I'm just very interested in seeing how that's playing out in all its various forms.
Harley, you trying
What you
to
got, Harley?
Yeah. You know, we thank you for bringing up history repeating itself, and systems of racism. In my view, one way we can combat the systems of racism is educate our kids on the history. And I can't think of a better vehicle to make them cultural ambassadors and astute on the history than music. One of my favorite books is the Anthology of North American Music by Neil Lomax. Neil Lomax is the one who went around with a tape recorder and he found Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters was like, hey, that's me. He didn't even know about electronic recordings, but that became Muddy Waters, and we know how the kids in England came and made all the money. That's not the point. The point is, if we're going to not keep repeating ourselves, if we're not going to be victims of a system, maybe we should arm our kids with some civics and some culture and some music. Thank you.
You got tonight's panel will talk to that as well, Harley. We have Malachi Amen, Dr. Andrea Moore, Sonia Lewis, and Leah. And what I think we're going to have for their discussion is a conversation about where do we go from here in other places. Educationally, how do we do things differently? The way you talk about it, the music as an educational tool to educate our kids, to educate our community.
As a civil rights tool for activism. Said James Brown said, say it loud.
I'm Black and I'm proud.
Right? Hey, you know, Duke said Black Beauty. You know, Lewis sang Black and Blue. The struggle has been tied to song since we've been here. And it's just what it is. So the kids got to know this. They have to know this. It's not like, oh, German kids know Beethoven. They know Mozart. Go. Right?
So after you finish your first up, we'll have Malachi Amen, Andrea Moore, Leah Shink, and Sonia Lewis to have that panel on freedom and activism. Marcus, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. And speaking of music, I just wanted to introduce some cats that I've known for a very long time. Mainly Clark and Harley White. We go back some 30 years when I first got my start in this music, and they were my teachers and taught me about Miles Davis, John Coltrane. I was a young puppy, and Harley comes from a very storied background. and having toured and recorded and coming from what we call music royalty. And I'm glad to see you got the big dog today, Harley. Got the big dog. So without any further delay, we're going to hear some music from the... Oh, one more young cat I just met, Dominique Garcia on drums. And we're so happy to have him. This is his third time with us as well. So without any further delay, the Harley White Jr. Trio.
Like to dedicate a song
Yes.
to out here. This is an Ellington favorite of ours called Warm Valley, or Very Hot Valley in this instance.
Cool. Harley White Trio. Thank you guys. We appreciate you. You'll be back. We are looking forward to you at the end of the show.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for your renditions. You guys are in the center because it's so hot. I'm happy that you took it upon yourself to make sure you get out of that weather. It's hot out there. It's been hot for a while. The heat, the smoke, the fire. It's been tough 4 months pandemic. We've had a lot happening in our area. When we undertook this summer's activity, the 6 weeks that we have been doing this, a lot of it was just about Black history and Black excellence, but some of it was really to have conversation around those tough topics.
Yes.
That we sometimes have avoided. Tonight's panel, Malachi Amin,
My little brother, yes.
of the California Urban Partnership, Dr. Andrea Moore, she said call her an activist and a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And Sonia Lewis. Sonia is the community activist and CEO with Scribe Educational Consulting, and Ms. Leah Skink, who is the founder of Impact. Malachi, I asked you to kind of take on this task, if you don't mind, to kind of lead us through a conversation next 20 minutes or so. 20 plus minutes, you got it. So just want to kind of get out of your way and welcome you to our Black History Summer Nights series. And that I'm out your way. Take it from here.
Well, I just want to thank my big brother and big sister, Daryl Tina Roberts, for always bringing us together, always showing us love. This community is made better because of the incredible work that you do. our children are better. I can't imagine Sacramento without the presence of both of you as well as your work, because we see the difference that you're making in the lives of children. We see the difference that you're making in terms of leadership and mentoring those of us who are making our way and navigating through these processes of going from protest to policy making to systems change and really improving the quality of life for Black people intentionally, as well as other marginalized communities. And so we're here tonight, Black History Summer Nights.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. And we're going to have a freedom and activism conversation. And so I guess we're all going to kind of talk a little bit about ourselves, as well as have a conversation about what we do and why we do it and why it's important. Tonight we have Leah Shank, founder of Impact. We have Sonia Lewis, the phenomenal Sonia Lewis. One day, you know, I'm going to figure out how to get a pair of glasses like that so that I can ball too. You know, I have glasses, but I put them aside because they're just not balling like yours are. So, and I am Malachi Amen, head of the California Urban Partnership, and I'll be your moderator tonight. As the head of the California Urban Partnership, I work to build economic security in communities of color, and do that through research, through education, and through organizing community action. For about 25 years, I've been in the community economic development space, launched community and business support programs, steered policy as an appointee inside California legislature and the governor's office. And I've advised Fortune 500 companies in some high stakes public affairs issues. This year, the California Urban Partnership will celebrate its 10th year of existence.
Congratulations.
Thank you
That's
so much.
Awesome.
And so, you know, we're doing a number of things in the way of a Black business app. We led the negotiations for the Cannabis Equity Program. Right now, we're working on the documentary to educate the public about why we need to direct more of those cannabis tax revenues. And then finally and lastly, there's a lot of work to do aside from cannabis in terms of economic recovery and take an industry-specific approach. So that's a little bit about me. I'd now like to go to Leah Shank. Leah, can you tell us about yourself and your work?
Hi everybody.
Leah.
It's Leah Shank. I am the founder of Impact. That's okay. I answer to both. I am, with Impact, we tackle social injustices. Obviously, we also go into the school districts and we deal with Black and Brown issues within the school districts of a lot of families that are dealing with suffrage right now, especially right now with the pandemic and then going into school, very unconventional way of starting the first day of school for us all. And then also I'm a huge autism advocate. My son was diagnosed at 18 months with autism. So that is a huge fight of mine, and just helping families along with that struggle as well. And then also I'm a huge advocate for mass incarceration and ending it and getting our sisters and our brothers home that have done their time, that are being double tried and triple tried, and even now being in there with COVID, they're dying, you know, going in there with charges of 2-3 year terms and you know, non-violent offenses, and then they go in there to die due to COVID because they're not able to social distance. So that right now is the steering the forefront of what I am doing at this very moment.
Salute, my sister. Appreciate you tremendously. Sonia Lewis, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I mean, you know, I don't know who doesn't know already, but but please tell us, for those who don't, about yourself and the work that you do.
Well, Sonia Lewis here. I am the CEO and president of Ascribe Educational Consulting. And like you, Malachi, Ascribe has withstained 11 years of being in business. And so, and I say sustained because although there's name recognition that I've been able to garner in the community around the work of educational and racial equity, sustained in the sense that sometimes we know, you know, Daryl and Tina can attest to that our work sometimes is overshadowed by the dollar, but we know in our hearts what we have to do in order to serve our babies. And so that's like the spirit of where I come from. I'm a former educator, 20 years in teaching high school social studies history, mostly 11th grade U.S. history and 12th grade government and economics. But I've taught everything under the sun when it comes to social studies. So that is just like my heart. When I left teaching, the need still existed for Black representation. And there's still a huge void when we talk about, are there enough Black and Brown, LGBTQ faces and bodies on campuses around not just California and the Sacramento area, but around the country. And so that equity piece is huge. And then that lends to why we need ethnic studies, and that just anybody can't teach ethnic studies because they haven't walked that walk and that experience. They have no connection to the Black lived experience, the Latinx lived experience, and so on and so forth. And so that, in my opinion, with Ascribe, what I try to do, because I am also the mother of 6 Black boys, and that's important to me, is I am trying to marry what educational equity and social activism looks like, right? Because at the end of the day, we need our babies to be prepared to fight for their agency. And that means they have a voice. There are things that they want to fight for, and they need to have the tools and the wherewithal, the strength and the courage to do that, make that fight valuable to them. And so that's Sonia and why I fight in these streets.
All right. Whose streets?
My streets. Your streets, our streets.
Our streets. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then I missed Dr. Andrea Moore earlier, but I understand that she's also on the line.
Yes, I am here.
All right. Welcome. Welcome so much. Okay, now I see a face. Welcome to tonight's panel. Dr. Moore, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Hey, family. Good to be in community with you all. My name is Andrea Moore. I am a Baydestrian by way of Dallas, Texas. So I grew up in the Bay Area, Richmond, Oakland, California, groomed and proud of that. I am currently a professor in the Ethnic Studies Department at Sacramento State. I am also the director of the Cooper Woodson College Enhancement Program, which is a Pan-African retention program started back in 1990 by Dr. Otis Scott, David Colvin, and a lot of Black faculty and staff on the Sacramento State community. I am also the anti-race and social justice rep for our union for the CFA, California Faculty Association at Sac State. And I'm also the CEO of Dreamhorn Consulting. So I am an educator, I'm a speaker, I'm an activist, I'm a mobilizer, and I'm new relatively to the Sacramento area. So I came to Sacramento permanently back in, it's been about 6 years now. And it took me some time to get acclimated into this community because I was so, Bay Area on that. When I left the Bay Area, I moved to Davis, California to get education. So let me just say I'm what they would call the non-traditional student. I was a teen mother, had my first child, got pregnant at 19, had my first child at 20, second a couple of years after that. And I am the one in my family who decided to attend higher education and get a PhD and earn a PhD. And so part of my messaging is always that, absolutely, part of my messaging is that what I received growing up in Richmond and Oakland, and then when I became pregnant at such a young age, the messages that I received about my existence and about my sustainment was that I was just going to be another statistic, another woman on welfare. And I knew that I had to ignore that dominant message. So part of what I do in every space is, first, we're going to ignore this, we're going to examine this dominant message. We're going to talk about it. We're going to flip it over on its head. We're going to see where it centers us as Black folks. And so I'm all about liberating the mind and really deprogramming us to value what we have been taught to devalue in ourselves, in our culture. And so I bring that into the classroom. And it's really like my personal story that I try to do a better job of sharing, because it is so much a part of who I am and the work that we do. Right now, I'll hold off on the rest of the questions that we have, but right now it's really important to me that we pour into our young folks who they are, knowledge of self, and that it connects back to their grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles, cousins, all the shoulders of who we stand on, so that when they know when we come as one, but we stand as 10,000. So really just really trying to elevate and uplift us to tap into our own agency and power. And I do that in a myriad of ways. I also am really interested in mass incarceration. I've had the opportunity to work at the Stockton Juvenile Facility for a few years now, where I'll go in and I'll provide like a 6-week course or something related to content that I think they need that builds them up. So again, I'm really happy to be joining folks who are mobilizing across the state to end mass incarceration for both women and men. Yes, yes.
Salute, salute. So we have such an esteemed panel. Tina and Daryl, you guys are rock stars as usual around pulling great minds together and helping us to move to do something great. We have a brief period of time, it looks like, because we're going to do, what is that show called? Crossfire, where they have really quick conversations about different issues. So let's go into the crossfire. And on the crossfire, first inquiry is this whole piece around freedom and activism. When I think about freedom and activism, I think about my mom struggling to complete her nursing degree, and us depending on public assistance in Del Paso Heights, going to see Mama Marks at the church to get food and clothes, and certainly, fast forward to now, seeing these data around Black-owned businesses, only 95% of them actually having employees, and then, seeing how when we look at the racial wealth gap, how it will take 228 years from now for the average Black family's wealth to actually catch up with the average white family's wealth, and how that plays into or connects to the slave catcher tradition of police, and how we've really kind of been in a cycle of being under the thumb of the slave catcher as we've struggled to really level the playing field. That's what freedom and activism means to me. Leo, what is that? How does that resonate with you, freedom and activism?
I can say, when we talk about freedom, we know freedom isn't free. So we know, like us, just as Black people, we're free-ish, but that's all relative to our day-to-day life as well. When it comes to activism, that's our culture. It's where we all come from. Everything we have by way of Black people, we've had to march for, protest for, beg for, picket for, boycott for. And so this is no different. This is us wanting what they wanted back in the segregation or back in civil rights. And this is our Civil Rights 2020. And so it's very akin in the sense that we are asking for essentially the same things, which is basic equality. We're asking for the same civil liberties that white people are afforded just by human right, just by birth, that we don't get. So when we talk about freedom, freedom for who? And what does that look like? That's going to look different for all of us. It's going to look different than our neighbor and our coworker and the person, you know, that we may be passing while we're in the store. So our freedom looks very different than the freedom of others. And so when we're out here and we talk about activism and we're protesting and we're out here in these streets, that's us trying to get basic civil liberties, which takes us back and ties us back into freedom.
I love it. Sonia, freedom and activism, how does it resonate with you?
I 100% agree with Leah. It is a matter of a desire. You know, freedom is that thing I think that we are searching for, we are reaching for, we are going to fight and strive for, but we haven't arrived at yet. I think oftentimes it's an extreme misnomer to think that even in 2020, when we talk about freedom and associating it with Black folks, that it is something that we arrived at back in 1863 when it was signed, and 1865 when it actually went into action, or even 1963 when it was signed and 1965 when it went into action. So that now we are in 2020 and we are looking at legislation being changed, when we're looking at policy and stuff being presented in a way that says, we're still fighting for this. Like, I'm more concerned about my humanity and the humanity of all of us on this panel, as well as when I step outside of my door and what humanity looks like for every person, Black, brown, white, poor, socioeconomically fragile, those who are suffering with mental health issues, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. That's what freedom means to me. And until, you know, King said it best, until all of us are free, none of us are free. And we still live in that vein. And so until that day comes, we still have to be the activists that we are. We walk on their shoulders. They have provided us with a blueprint, you know, all of the pitfalls that they made, you know, some to a certain degree, we're still making them. But with the progress is that we're still fighting. The progress is, like my shirt says, I won't be comfortable. I won't be quiet while somebody else is comfortable. Because comfort is the only way that we get growth.
Absolutely. Without struggle, there is no progress. And,
that's right.
And we certainly have to see that and hone in on it every day. Dr. Andrea, freedom and activism, how does it resonate with you?
When I think about freedom, I first think about our mind and liberating our minds. And really, again, tapping into knowledge of self. So really knowing who you are and where you come from, and understand how so much of who we are and what was stripped away from us was connected to our self-identity. And so to me, when I think about freedom, I think of Nina Simone, who talked about what freedom really means to her.
Come on now.
Tamika Mallory's organization called Until Freedom. I think about what I heard the sister say, talking about, you know, what does freedom look like and to who? And we're free-ish, but what does that actually mean for us? And so for me, it starts with understanding that you are your own property. You own yourself. No one owns you. You own yourself. And how do you activate your agency? How do you understand that? Freedom is also connected to being completely yourself without the fear or worry of how others may perceive you. Being able to live out loud, unapologetically, is freedom to me. When I think about I think about freedom on an individual, and then I think about freedom as a collective, right? Also, collectively, we have a long way to go in terms of what we think freedom looks like. Because for some of us, it looks like capital, right? For some of us, it looks like having just as much money as the highest paid person in America. And so it looks different, right? And so I think freedom is also us not policing each other, you know, constantly, because they have ingrained this, you know, this historical internalized, what I say, self-hatred in us so much that as soon as something happens, we don't need anybody else to critique us. We're going to tear each other down first, right? And so we talk about, oh, crab in the bucket mentality. But I'm always here to remind folks that the crabs in the bucket are not in their original habitat. So we have to pay attention to who put us in the bucket to begin with, right? And so when I think about activism, I think about activating that agency and using your power, which is your voice, to speak to that truth, wherever that is in your life, whether you are a college student, where you are a second grader, wherever you're at your church. How do you activate your agency, and what are you doing as a change agent to make this world a better place for all humans? Yes, I center Blackness, but I've also been taught that as we look at our Black intellectual leaders, they move their platforms to humanitarian platforms because they were no longer going to be duped by the ism that continued to divide us. So I too try and bring in this humanitarian experience to liberation, but I do center Blackness unapologetically.
Okay, now you said something, you just said a word. When you talk about using one's agency to move to the solution, to move into freedom, to really activate and personally make freedom real. And so when we talk about that, as it relates to individuals, when we talk about that as it relates to our community collectively, how do we activate? What is the priority now in terms of activating our personal agency, activating our collective agency to achieve the change that we want to see, whether we're talking about social justice and human rights, whether we're talking about community health, we're talking about education, bridging the racial wealth gap by building community wealth, because we know that being broke is not going to get us anywhere. How do we activate and move towards freedom? Leah, you want to talk about that?
Absolutely, and that's a loaded question, because obviously it has many components. A lot. We got to be everywhere all the time, right? Yeah. That's everywhere. We can talk about being out in the streets, and we can talk about that type of social justice. We can talk about being in the Capitol. We can talk about being in City Hall. We can talk about being in the school districts. We can talk about being the voices of change. A lot of people don't have that voice or just don't have the platform to use their voice. So that always presents a problem. But it's really a matter of us getting involved. And getting involved too means collectively. See, that part is missed, right? Especially right now. That's a frustrating piece, I know, for me, because we are all not unified. We're all not together. We're all such powerful people, but we're never in the same place. We never come together and do things to that magnitude that would really make a huge, huge impact on not just the city of Sacramento, but the county of Sacramento, every single areas within Sacramento that get missed very often, and on a larger scale. So it's really a matter of just tapping into all of the resources we have and going into spaces that we normally would not be welcomed. A lot of times you don't see people like us in the Capitol, on the Senate floor, trying to make a change, or even not going. Maybe you go to City Hall meeting, but you don't have the strength or the wherewithal to get up there and speak and to voice your concerns and to be heard. So some people don't have that in them as well. So it's really not for everybody. We know that protesting is not for everybody. Okay, going down to the Capitol is not for everybody. Everyone has to pick a piece of this pie. But it would really be so much more beneficial if we all just came together and collectively, because we all want the same thing.
That's right.
So why not come together and get it together collectively as one unit, as one fight?
Okay, you just said a word there, and we have probably about 5 more minutes. I'm going to see if Daryl Latino let me squeeze 7. So we have a little bit.
Squeeze it.
Okay, let's squeeze it. All right. So we have a little bit more left. Sonia, that individual and collective activism, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
How should that be cracking for us? How should it be cracking?
Right. I mean, I appreciate Leia's breakdown of that we have. I always say that we are enough. We have the resourcefulness, we have the resilience, we have lived in the dichotomy of struggle and oppression and trauma for over 400 years. So we know that we're enough. And being in the same, to make the impact, right? To be in the same place at the same time, to be as impactful as possible. While it has been a challenge, I think that we are being led by a new generation of young folks who see the problems that we've had and the pitfalls that we have succumbed to in this struggle. And so I'm getting it cracking for me is making sure that young people have agency and voice. Getting it cracking for me right now, I'm about to be 50 years old. I might not look like it, and I might look like I can get it cracking, and I still can. Don't let the smooth taste fool you. But my 50-year-old self cannot do what my 22-year-old self did. You know, at 22, that was 1992 when Rodney King was beat. And myself as a college student, I was shutting down the Bay Bridge. So flip ahead to my 48-year-old self when we shutting down freeways. That was like, okay, I've been there and I've done that. I need young people. And they did. They showed up and they showed out in a way that has woke this city and county up, that woke up not only the NBA, that stopped business, right? That was young people. And so I like to make sure that we are given that agency, that voice, and that opportunity to young people to take the torch and let them run this race. When we talk about the individualness, people have to come to that moment within themselves, right? Like, when does it now impact me in a way that is making my life uncomfortable, that I now have to say something about it? I'll give you an example. My 19-year-old, and I'm gonna do this very shortly, but my 19-year-old had an experience at a primarily white institution where he's a college student, where some white boys decided that outside of his college room dorm, they were gonna say, nigga, 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 nigga. Loud enough for him to hear it and jolting enough for his heart to feel it, his soul to feel it, his spirit to feel it.
I know something about that.
Right?
I know something about that.
So that when George Floyd happened, he said, I can't sit back on the sidelines and allow my mother to be in the front doing this. That he decided, Mom, take me to some protests so I can see what I need to do and how to show up. And then he decided, I'm going to go by myself and not ask my mother's permission. And he showed up. And now he is organizing events, not asking my permission, but asking me to come speak, and organizing himself so he knows how to show up. That's the agency of individualism when it comes to activism. Us collectively, we have to respect that collectively we all have and travel down different lanes. And I need people on the inside to be respected, just like I need people on the outside to be respected. I don't need people on the inside saying, get out the streets, to the people who are out there in the streets keeping the name of our loved ones alive. But I need for us on the outside not to be as judgmental of those who are on the inside, who seemingly are practicing respectable politics, but they've given us information and intel that we know that we need. So I can't say nothing to my brother and sister who's on the inside giving me intel and shaming them for the job that they know that they've secured for themselves. So we have to balance that. We have to say, when is enough that we don't do the infighting within community, but at the same time that we set up enough communication so that we're respecting each other. And at the end of the day, that's where we grow. That's where we foster and nurture and leave a legacy behind for our young people to then follow after.
Thank you so much. Dr. Andrea Moore, we got a few more minutes. How do we activate individually and collectively?
Yes, sir. Really quickly, on an individual level, when you enter a space, you have to show up as your whole self, your whole entire self. And what I mean by that is, if you kicking it with your cousins on a Saturday at the house and they're saying some anti-Black statements, or they're saying some homophobic or transphobic statements, and that makes you feel some kind of way, you may not be someone who identifies as such of any of those communities. But I do know that if it bothers you and we go into spaces and we lull ourselves, meaning we turn ourselves down, we dumb ourselves down, that's not activating your individual agency. And so I had to tell myself a few years back when we had the first Black Women's March, I think it was in 2017, I cannot stand on this platform and talk to women about issues that women are going through if I have not addressed those issues with people in my life that I am going through those issues with, for example. And so on an individual level, we have to show up our whole self, and we have to be willing to speak up, like Sonia said, when other folks might be uncomfortable. We cannot lull ourselves to sleep with the continued ways that we damage ourselves, or that feeds into genocide. And then as the collective, yes, there's a beautiful piece written called The Intersections by Funmi Lola. My sister, she wrote this beautiful, beautiful piece that's coming to Sacramento. So y'all should tap in, I'll share it with you. And she talked about the different, like 5 different caste types of so-called woke Black folk, and how we're woke in all of these different areas, but how we struggle with coming together and collectively doing this work. And she talks about the need that there is for every single one of them. There's a need for every single one of them, and we have to be able to respect each other's differences and opinions, and not regurgitate any form of oppression to each other, right, in this work. But we have to realize that we all need all of each other. All of the pieces need to come together. And one example of that is with the AB 1460 bill that just passed for the CSUs to have, for students to take at least one ethnic studies course. Now, we got the bill passed collectively after 2 years of work. Dr. Shirley Weber, you know, she authored the bill.
Reparations study.
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking, reparations doesn't always look like dollars, right? In some ways, it looks like making sure we get educated. But what folks kept leaving out that conversation was that we have ethnic studies because people protested for Black studies. That came off the backs of young Black folks in elementary school, junior high, and high school, going to HBCUs even, where it's at HBCU, and holding those administrators accountable for Black studies. And
There's a foundation for it. There's a foundation for that. And
yes,
you know,
sir.
I am so sorry, Dr. Moore. We could go on and on and on with this, but, you know, because I mean, there's so much more to talk about in terms of Black agenda, and to drill down into action teams and what the categories are. But we've run out of time. I so appreciate all of the brilliant and beautiful panelists that have joined us tonight on this Black History Summer Nights edition, brought to us by the Roberts Family Development Center. And we've learned something about freedom and activism. Yes. And I think we'll be better for it. Daryl and Tina, back to you.
Thank you, Malachi.
Yes, thank you all so much. And you all truly are Black history. Thank you. So I have the task now of introducing again the Harley White Trio. Yes, are they there? Okay. So on keyboards, I have Clark Goodlow. On drums, Dominique Garcia. Hey, Clark. Hey, Dominique. And Sacramento's own incomparable Harley White Jr. on bass. Take it away.
The one and only Mr. Harley White Trio.
Yes, yes, good music.
Thank you guys.
Good
Beautiful.
music.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right.
Mark, we're gonna thank you, bro, for your time, for your willingness to work with us. It wasn't quite what we had hoped it to be in terms of the fundraising aspect, but I think what it did do is bring people an awareness to our work around activism, or our work around celebrating Black joy and the Black experience. So for us, it accomplished those goals, hopefully in the future, and certainly next summer, but maybe even before that, we might have an opportunity to do something around fundraising. But Harley, you and Marcus, I really want to thank you guys for being involved, really do. Mark, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I think at the very least, we planted some seeds in this new format.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think Black history fits in a 1 month, in a 1 month scheme. And so just to think outside of that box, I think we all are living our lives like this
Right.
each day.
Right.
But to bring it in a public sphere and fundraising or not, I think just sort of planting some seeds and then coming back together and watching these seeds grow. But so thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for bringing me together with my homeboy Harley White Jr. and you know, it was some fascinating discussions over the last 5 weeks.
It really has been. Really have been thankful for those folks who have joined us. Thankful for those panelists who have spent that time with us. Yeah, I'm being reminded I need to move over closer. Thankful that folks have taken that time and have been willing to invest in what we're trying to do. So, you know, thank you, Ms. Roberts. Appreciate you.
Yes.
Harley, thank you, my friend. So,
Hey man, anytime. You know how we do.
right on, we will be doing it.